Hey guys, got a little something different here for you today. It's a little bit more of a maintenance issue. I've had these Powermatic Super 27 shapers for the last probably 11 years or so. I got them used dirt cheap from my actual employer at the time, and I couldn't pass it up. But anyways, when I'd gotten them, the spindles were shot, so I put 2 new spindles in them, and I worked with a guy, a local Powermatic distributor, who was able to get me a couple spindles pretty cheap. And I also had traded one of my very first shapers, which you never saw, which was a Boyce crane, and he really wanted that because it was a nice shaper for a hobbyist, and he gave me kind of the best dollar I could, but at the same time I needed some spindles, so we kind of worked out a deal. So anyways, those of you who aren't familiar with the Powermatic 27 or 27S, or also known as the 27 Super, they run, you can get them with an interchangeable spindle with a 1/2 inch and 3/4. You can get it with a 3/4 solid and then a 1 1/4 solid. On both of the 27 Supers that I have, I run an 1 1/4 solid. However, for the last probably 30 plus years, if not longer, I think even in the 26, which is the previous model, Powermatic's always run aluminum pulleys on the spindle and on the motor itself. And what happens is, over a period of time, the nut that holds the pulley on the bottom of the spindle will actually come loose ever so slightly, and you'll hear the rattle. I'm not sure we'll be able to hear it here. I'll move the camera to the back side and show you the pulley and belt system as well. But you don't really hear it when it's running, but you hear it when it coasts down, which is the sign of it. But if you hear it rattle really bad while it's running, it needs to be addressed, and I'll explain to you why. That little bit of a rattle right there, that's kind of what happens is it's a single phase unit, and the centrifugal switch had opened up again, and it basically discharged the capacitor on the motor, so therefore it's kind of like a braking motion to a certain extent. But anyways, as you heard that rattle, that's the sign of it. If you let it go too long, what can happen if you get really bad luck is the pulley will start running oblong. It'll start to shake and vibrate a little bit. Eventually, because it's aluminum, you'll actually make the hole in the pulley, or the bore in the pulley, oblong, which for, like I said, the employer that I worked for in the department that ran these, that was quite the case. And you didn't always hear it in such a loud environment. You know, it was a big plant, you had a big dust collection system running, you just didn't always get to hear that stuff. But anyways, there's a solution for that, and I want to show you guys what the solution is, and I'm actually going to do it right in front of you guys to show you what it is. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the spindle, I'm going to pull the tooling off, drop the spindle, I'm going to take the pulley off, and I'm actually going to drill and tap a couple of set screw holes. We're going to put a set screw in there as a precaution. The new spindles that we were getting from the distributor at the time was doing the same thing because it had always been an issue. I had a long discussion with the parts manager with that distributor before they went under, and he had always said he'd been telling Powermatic for 20 years that they need to put set screws in those pulleys or make them out of cast. But they always went aluminum, and they'd come loose after a while. So I'm going to move the camera to the back side and show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so here is the back side of the shaper. I've got the door removed, and here we have the 3 horsepower single phase motor, and this is actually a big frame 3 horse. Originally, the reason I went to the big frame, which is actually more expensive, it's probably a little bit more robust as well, but this is actually a 184T frame. It does have the 1 1/8" shaft. Oops. There we go. It's got the 1 1/8" shaft. This pulley is aluminum, and this pulley is aluminum. So basically, somebody might be wondering, it's like, well, why did you go with an 1 1/8" shaft motor if it was more expensive? It's only a 3 horse. Part of the reason was I had actually, when I bought these, they were bare. They had basically, I convinced them to give me the reversing switch, but I didn't want anything else with the electrics. I couldn't use the magnetic starter, couldn't use the motor because it's a big 5 horse, and it was actually cheaper for me to convert over to single phase. Well, being I had already gotten the pulley, the cost of the pulley pretty much was about the same cost as if I would have bought, well, I guess the way I need to explain it is, if I had to buy a new pulley and I bought the standard 145T frame motor with the 7/8 shaft, I've been about the same cost as this one motor. So it was just easier for me just to not have to buy a new pulley and just buy the more expensive motor, because it was about the same cost versus, like I said, buying a new pulley and a new motor. So anyways, bring it a little closer to the pulley here. On the very bottom of this pulley there's a nut. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit here. Okay, so this nut, and I'll take the spindle out here shortly, but this nut basically is holding this pulley tight to the shoulder of the shaft. And there's a keyway in there, so it won't slip that way. What happens after a while is, even with this nut on here, and there's actually a spider washer in there with little fingers you can bend over to get into one of these notches, it'll actually come loose. And actually I can turn this right now. I can turn this nut ever so slightly. Yeah, you won't be able to see it on camera, but let me see if I can hold this. Yep, I can move that nut. You can hear that. So you might say, well, that's just simple as tightening up the nut. Yep, it is. But at the same time, the one other thing I want to point out is that nut will come loose after a while, which will make this whole pulley loose. But the idea of drilling and tapping a couple set screws over the keyway is to help eliminate the pulley from coming loose and becoming oblong should this nut come undone. So I've had a Grizzly G1026, which is a direct knockoff of the Powermatic 26, and basically it's the same thing, except the V-belt was a little bit different. This one here is a 3VX. I think it's a 300 millimeter. Or I think it's a 3VX 300, so I think it's 300 millimeters. I'm not sure. I'm not real familiar with the metric system, but anyways, it's a little bit different V-belt. It's still a standard V-belt, but typically you're not going to find this at a hardware store. You're going to have to order it from an industrial supplier. But yeah, so let me pull the tooling off of this, and then I'll show you how to drop the spindle, and then we'll go over as far as how I'm going to correct this issue. So always, first and foremost, always unplug your machines when you're doing maintenance. Even if it's something really simple, if you're coming anywhere as near close to the saw blades or cutters or router bits or anything, always unplug it or lock out, tag out. You know, dumb things can happen, so I just point out that this machine is unplugged. And I'm just going to throw this over here. Okay. Here's one other key point I want to point out. People get really gung-ho on just wrenching down their tooling. It's not always the, I shouldn't say not always the best practice, but it's probably a little bit overkill. I see people that'll actually take one of these wrenches and they'll put like a pipe over it or they'll weld something onto it. This tooling doesn't have to be that tight. It's got to be tight, but it doesn't have to be like Armstrong tight. I mean, the idea is that you're sandwiching the cutters or the saw blade on a table saw between the flanges or the shoulder on the spindle or shaft. So once you get that tight, it'll stay tight, you know, its whole duration. This shaper, by the way, I use to run stiles and rails, so I have it double stacked with a stile and rail cutter. The first cutter is the tenon cutter. Then I have a set of precision shims. This shim set here is set up perfectly between my cope and stick cutter, basically. and this here is the one that cuts the groove. So this setup here will allow me to cut both the tongue and the groove without adjusting the height. The only time I need to adjust the height is if I want to change the depth of the profile. The nice thing about that is because I have them spaced out perfectly between the coping sled and the table. If I want to make an adjustment to the height, they both move at the same time, and they're always perfectly flush on the front because I do cut them face down. So, alright, so I don't want to lose the shim set. Okay, so I have everything here pulled off. Now I'm going to show you how to actually remove the spindle. Okay, so there's three wrenches or three tools you're going to need. You're going to need 2 wrenches and a screwdriver. You're going to need a 9/16 wrench, and that's going to loosen up this bolt right here, which basically is there's a split in the casting, as you can see here. What that'll do is that'll loosen the tension off of the quill or the spindle cartridge. But before you do that, you're going to need a 3/4 inch wrench, and you're going to need to take out the top bolt on the motor mount. Don't take the bottom one out, and with the top one, just take the top one. If you take the bottom one out, the motor is going to be laying on the floor, and it's going to be a real pain to get that motor back up there again, not to mention you probably have damaged the fan cover. Got a ghost in the shop. So before I loosen this bolt here that holds the casting, squeezes the casting, I'm going to take out, oops, you can't see that too well. You got to take out this bolt here, which is a 3/4 inch, and this basically just adjusts your belt tension, but only take the top one out, do not loosen the bottom one. If you have your belt tension set up correctly, you should be able to roll the belt off without having to move the motor. However, if you're having trouble with the slipping belt, there's a couple things I would take a look at. Number one is with these aluminum pulleys, under a heavy load, this belt will eventually become glazed after a while. So you can get this belt good and tight, and it'll still slip around this pulley here. So I've had that in the past. You can use belt dressing, but at the same time where I get these belts, I pay about $8 for them, so I just throw the belt away and start out with a new one. So, alright. So the first thing, we're bringing it a little bit closer here. We're just going to remove, like I said, the top bolt here. And apologize if I get my arms in the way here. At the same time, I want to make sure that this one is good and tight before I go any further. Yep. So I'm going to take this one out. Now you shouldn't have any tension on this bolt. The only thing I've got is I got a lot of dust probably built up on the other side, so it's coming out a little bit fussy, but it'll work. So if you don't take this out, you're going to find out a surprise that you're not going to get the cartridge out. It'll hit that bolt, the pulley will hit the bolt, and you won't get it out. So you got to push the cartridge back up again, tighten it up, and pull this bolt out. So it's a pretty heavy bolt. 2 of these holding the motor up. Like I said, only take the top one out. Put it someplace so you don't lose it. Alright, so that's it for the 3/4 inch wrench. Now, let's see if I can do this here without getting in the way of the camera. I'm going to first roll off the belt, which I could have done earlier, but now is a good time to do it. Careful not to pinch your fingers. Now you just take the belt and put it on the motor shaft. Okay, now I'm going to loosen up this. Let's go bring it a little bit closer here. Loosen up this bolt right here. Now there should be some tension on there yet. You should be able to loosen this and it shouldn't be able to drop. But at the same time, I like to be a little bit precautious, so I'm going to loosen it. Get it fairly loose because they do squeeze this casting a fair amount. Okay, so I got it loose with my fingers. Now I can't really move that. So it's pretty safe to say that's not going to fall out. So next thing you're going to need is a big heavy duty screwdriver. This is pretty much what I use. It's just a cheap Stanley. But I'm going to stick it in between the casting here. I'm going to grab a hold of the spindle and I'm going to basically pry open the casting a little bit, and the spindle will fall right out. Well, not fall, but it'll slide right out. There we go. We now have the whole spindle assembly out of the shaper. So let me show you this, how big it is. So there's kind of a size comparison. It's 1.25 inches. It's probably standing about 12-13 inches tall right now. So this here is what I was talking about. Well, let's just do it this way. This nut is loose, and as you can see here, I've got the spider washer in here, which is the way they come, but it still managed to come loose yet. So the idea is, right where this keyway is here, I'm going to drill and tap 1 or 2 set screws. And I might do just one and then go 90 degrees to the other side. I don't remember exactly how these were done. It's been 10 years since I replaced the spindle at my work, but I know that they had at least 1 set screw over the keyway. So that's gonna be a tiny set screw. So, but yeah, that's what we're gonna do. Is we're going to take this off, pull the pulley off, drill a 1 or 2 holes for 1 or 2 set screws. Like I said, at least 1 over the keyway. I might just stop with 1 over the keyway, which should be basically, it should be good enough. But yeah, so, but as you can might put a little Loctite on this nut as well, but basically the idea of the set screw is to be treated like a traditional pulley, is that it'll hold the pulley in place with the set screw as well. And this is only threaded on the very end. It's not threaded all the way through, to the best of my knowledge. So regardless if it was, the set screw is still going to go over the keyway for the time being. So, alright.